The following was recorded in front of a live studio audience at the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe. This is the United Podcast Network.
Welcome to the Quirky Dog Podcast, inspired by some of the quirkiest dogs you can ever imagine and the owners who love them. This podcast is brought to you by the quirky couple themselves, Scott and Jess Williams. Their aim is to educate and entertain. Here's Scott and Jess.
Well, welcome back to the Quirky Dog Podcast. I'm here with Jess Williams, and we're going to talk about, I came up with a question the other day when I came home from a class. I said, Jess, what do you think the most difficult problem is for a dog trainer to fix?
And I didn't have an answer, so we're going to unhash it, as I like to say,
yes,
here today.
We're going to unhash that question.
But first, we're going to start with the quirky tip of the day. All right, the quirky tip of the day is, if you think your dog is a heavy breather, and this is a very common thing. Now, obviously, like post-exercise and everything else, fine, the dog's panting heavier. If the dog is like in the living room, sitting on the couch, just hanging out, and you seem like, wow, that dog like is always breathing heavily, that is likely anxiety. This is coming up more and more and more often in our clients and dog people like saying like, oh, we always just thought she was a heavy breather. We happen to have a heavy breather in right now. He's actually in the parking lot. He's one of the heavier breathers. So that is normally a sign of anxiety. Just to let you know, if you're curious, dogs should just kind of at rest all breathe similarly, I would say.
Not to be confused with some child predator somewhere around a schoolyard.
Exactly. All right, now we are going to discuss, when you asked me this question, I didn't have an answer.
Yeah,
I said I thought about it. I gave it, like, I was pensive. I gave it probably a minute of thought, and I was thinking.
That's an incredible amount of attention to give towards a question
for me. And I said, I don't know. What do you think? And then I completely agreed with your answer. So what was your answer?
Well, my answer was helping people fix their relationship with their dog. And this is far beyond obedience training. This is how they feel about their dog, how they interact with their dog, because quite often it's that relationship that undermines so much of what we're trying to teach and what they're trying to teach their dog, you know?
Yeah, and I completely agreed. I thought that was a great answer, and it was like a little riddle that we had going on in the kitchen and the living room, and I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, I mean, like these basic teaching a dog to sit and whatnot they're very simple, and yet people have an incredibly difficult time with these things, and it's not because they don't understand how to teach the dog to sit, it's because of their relationship with the dog.
I want to give people credit that if your dog is responding differently with you, especially if you're in a training session, like that literally happens. That's not on you. Like, yes, mechanically, you're not as inclined as maybe we are because we've just had more hands-on experience and everything else, and we do this as a profession, so hopefully we're able to make things happen. But we have seen it firsthand ourselves. We say something, we're in the same environment, the owner does the same thing, the dog responds differently to the owner. So that is a relationship thing, and that is really how we started to kind of come up with our free course, Canine Mind Shift, and how to calm your canine. That's in the help link that we always have in front of our set. Like, these are the things that we started to implement to help the relationship because obedience alone wasn't helping it. So we actually have a list here today, luckily, because I'm a little low on energy. So we have a list to go off of. And we're going to talk.
You can do it.
We're going to talk a few of these things through because, like, you know, you may have a relationship problem with your dog. You may not. Someone may say you do. You don't think you do. It doesn't matter. But these are things that we would say are signs that you may have a relationship issue with your dog.
And I would say that if you've recently got the dog, if it's a rescue that you've only had in the house for a week or so, you may be having a lot of these same issues, but it has probably very little to do with your relationship with the dog. You haven't had the dog long enough to have a relationship.
It could have something to do with the previous owner's relationship with the dog. And there's always, the best news about this whole podcast is even if you do think like, oh my God, at the end of this, like this is me, this is an issue, like my dog and I are this to a T, there's always ways to improve the relationship. So that's the good news. All right, start us off.
I think sometimes just knowing it, having that awareness, that's half the battle.
Yes.
What you choose to do with that information, that's totally on you.
And don't beat yourself up.
Nobody's going to be able to fix that for you.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. All right, let's go through our list.
Well, the first thing I wrote, this is not in any kind of order. These are just things that came to mind that I just jotted down real quick. But the first one I thought of, or the first one I have written down, is the psychological/emotional inability to manage your dog on a leash or use a crate. And this is where I'll see people with a dog, and the dog is pulling towards another dog, towards a tree to pee, towards anything it wants to do. And the people are going behind the dog as if the dog is so powerful that there's nothing that they can do physically to stop this dog from moving. And sometimes the dog is only about 8 or 9 pounds.
That's what I was going to mention. Like, and if this is happening, it's often with a guy that's 200 plus pounds, like super ripped, and a dog that's like 12 pounds or under. So, they just have this need to think like, oh, the dog wants to go there. I'm going to help the dog go. But the dog is choosing that. And they actually feel bad, like just holding the end of that 6-foot leash and limiting the dog's movement.
Yeah, and there's a million reasons why they allow it to happen. I hear, well, the dog needs to sniff. The dog needs to do this. The dog needs to do that. And they're just kind of enslaved to this little dog.
And the crate, it's a similar thing. Scott was saying this, if we say to someone, use a crate with the dog, and then, maybe it's a 4-pack, we see the person the next week or 10 days or 2 weeks from them, and they haven't done it once, like, we're not now going to keep reiterating that and make people feel bad about that or anything else. Like, to each his own, it's everybody's own life. They can take our advice for what it's worth. However, if they hadn't done that even once in, a week to 2 weeks, that's an indication that there could be an issue there. And Scott mentioned earlier, too, like even psychological pressure. I think we were talking about that at home and not so much within the podcast yet, but like people like may perceive like, oh, well, the crate's a bad thing, or my mom thinks the crate's a bad thing, or whatever. Well, when you let those perceptions take over how you're actually handling your dog and what you're actually doing with your dog, then that could be a sign of a relationship issue.
Yeah, and we can go on and on about, the crate, but I've run into this, and in my mind, what's happening is these are just little boxes that are getting checked as I work with the people week after week. When I see, okay, well, they're not comfortable with this, I'm not passing any judgment, but I just have that in the back of my head, because if all of a sudden there's 3 or 4 of these boxes getting checked, then I know that no matter how much obedience I do with this person and this dog, those issues are never going to go away.
Yeah.
They're always going to have these same problems. And they could have 10, 15 trainers there. It's never going to change.
Which doesn't mean that we can't necessarily help them, but we need to approach things from a different angle. And similarly, when Scott's checking those boxes, if it's a dog with extreme anxiety and they want us to take that dog and they're not willing to implement a crate on the other end, that's not a boot camp candidate for us. Like, we know that's part of the dog's rehabilitation, so that's not an option for them. All right, next one is dog jumps on you when you try to control the leash.
Yeah, I've seen this many times where I will have the dog in for training just for basic obedience. He'll sit down, come when called, and I can walk this dog, and the dog is really, really nice on a leash. Just great manners, understands not to pull on the leash. And when I give the leash to the person and I tell the person to start walking the dog immediately tries to stop that person from controlling them by jumping, sometimes even starting to nip at their clothing and all that kind of stuff to stop that person from controlling them, because that's not the relationship that dog is accustomed to.
Yeah, and I do want to say as a caveat to that, like there are some dogs that's the go-to to protest with anything, right? So I would say when it's more of a relationship issue, like maybe we have not seen it whenever we hold the leash, especially if we've had the dog for a longer amount of time, and then you see it immediately with the owner. But there are some dogs that may think like, oh, I don't want you to control me, and that's their go-to for jumping and everything else. And that's still a relationship issue, but if it is with everyone, then maybe it has less to do with you and the dog. And it should still be addressed. And I want to give a little tip here that the way that Scott deals with that, especially on a return or something for anybody listening who's a trainer, is he'll actually put a long line on the dog. So the owner has the 6-foot leash, and then he has a long line so he can control that interaction a little better. And normally within 30 seconds to 3 minutes, that long line's off and the owner's walking the dog perfectly. But, if you're just sitting there and trying to make it stop, or if the owner's pushing the dog off, that problem can just escalate and escalate and escalate.
Yes.
So that was another good one. I loved that one.
Yeah, I mean, in the very extreme one we have where the gentleman was wearing his winter gloves in the summer because this dog was biting the crap out of him.
Yeah, and it's a real thing. Like it wasn't
the sweetest
a joke.
dog.
No, but that anxiety, it became that serious, and he went out with oven mitts almost. It was crazy.
The next one here I had was extreme leash reactivity, but towards other dogs and animals on the street, and yet the dog can go to daycare, has no trouble with dogs off leash with the daycare, but when it's with the owner, it's wanting to kill. It appears as though it wants to kill everything and keep people and dogs away from its owner.
Yeah, and then a lot of people say, "Oh, but the dog can go to the dog park, and go to daycare, and it's fine." And I'll take that one even a step farther and say, like, we've been in a situation where the same dog, the same group of people are standing in the same kitchen, our kitchen, and we can hold a leash and nothing happens. And just by handing that leash to the owner, they don't even have to do anything with the leash. The dog could just blow up because a different person is holding the leash. And again,
in that, and as far as another dog being in proximity, and all of a sudden the dog is now reactive.
yeah,
to
like
keep
the
that dog
same
away from
conditions,
my owner.
like same conditions, same 4 people standing there, same 3 dogs in the kitchen, same situation. It's just someone has a 6-foot leash versus another person. So, and again, like if any of this is like popping up and you're like, oh my God, that's happening with me, don't sweat it. That's not a big deal. But realize that there are maybe some little intricacies that you can fix within your relationship to help the overall picture and not just behavior.
The next one we have is feeling guilty or feeling that you're being mean for implementing some basic rules.
This is
in
kind
the
of like a
household.
good child parenting one too.
Kids are way harder than dogs, I'll tell you. Dogs are pretty straightforward.
All right, so this kind of goes with people that may not want to crate or control their dogs on a leash or anything else. But this is one, like, we say, put the dog on the bed for 45 minutes. That is so the dog can like fully decompress. If you're always just using the bed as like 5 minutes here when someone walks in or 10 minutes here while I bring in the groceries, the dog is never really settling into that exercise, right? And some people will literally say like, oh, I feel bad for the dog. Or the dog is like actually resting, like fully laying down, head down, like resting. Like you can see it is like fully in like a de-stress mode. And people are like, oh, but he doesn't look happy. Like that kind of thing, that could be more of a relationship thing. If the dog's just tired, that's okay. That could be a good thing for the whole house.
I have another example.
Okay.
Getting the dog out to go potty in the morning. And the people are rush, and the dog is dragging him out the door, and they're thinking, the dog has to pee, I got to get out there. The dog, if the dog is able to hold it all
That's
night
true.
long,
This is a
it
good
can
one.
hold it for an extra 2 minutes while you make the dog sit at the door, you calmly open the door, and there's some rules there. You don't
Yeah.
just blast out the front door.
Yeah.
And that is
And you're feeling bad about the dog because you're thinking,
Oh,
oh,
he's
it's
gotta
bladder.
pee. He's gotta
and
go.
even worse, like 3/4 of the people that feel like that, it still takes the dog then 10 minutes to go to the bathroom outside once they get outside.
Yeah, they
'cause
run
it's
around
got
in
a sniff
circles
for
out
its
there
perfect
being an
spot and
idiot.
everything else. All right, we're going to go to break super quick. And again, this commercial coming up is our free course, and it is one of our relationship helpers. And when we get back, we're going to go through the rest of our list.
Does your dog lack self-control? Are you looking for some answers? Would you like your dog to be calmer? Does your dog lack confidence? Canine Mind Shift. Enroll in a free course today. Simply go to caninemindshift.com. That's caninemindshift.com.
All right, if you skipped through commercial for some reason and you're back, here we are. We're back, and we are talking about signs of a relationship problem that you may have with your dog. And we are now on the 5th one that you came up with.
The 5th thing I came up with is that people may be unwilling or emotionally unable to leave their dog overnight with friends, family, or even a dog professional or a kennel so that they can go away for a vacation or some business trip, but they're just too concerned about their dog emotionally to leave the dog with anybody.
That is a good one. And honestly, we say this, and we do this with our own dogs, especially like getting them away, especially that first year for a long weekend or 5 days somewhere that you trust is good for the dog. Just the same way that it's good for the kids to go to summer camp and everything else. It's a good thing to consider. And I'll even take this one a step farther and say, some clients that we see, and this has not happened that recently, so maybe no one listens that has done this before, but some clients that we see actually have never left the house before. Like the dog has never been left alone its whole life. Like there's always someone home. And I would tie that into the relationship issue too. And we talked about the big house fire a few episodes ago, months ago, with Platinum Border Collies. And it was tragic and a lot of things came up online. What I was really surprised about is how many people said that they never leave their dogs home, which I get that like it's scary and things can happen and everything else and the nest systems can fail and stuff. But like, I would say that I saw at least half a dozen to a dozen to maybe 2 dozen people saying, I've never left my dog at home. Whenever I leave, the dog leaves with me, which I thought was kind of extreme too. But
well, I think
to each his own.
Out of all of this list, that's probably the one that I identify with the most.
Not leaving your dog?
I'm not leaving my dog with my family or friends for damn sure.
But a dog professional, you would? A dog professional, you would.
But I don't like to, but that's the biggest problem with the vacation is where are the dogs going to stay? Are they going to be, and I don't care if they're happy or not, that's not my issue. I want them to be safe, and I don't want them to get into some situations where they are going to come back less emotionally stable than when they left. I don't want them to come back fearful of people, places, things, other dogs. I just want them to be in a place where they're safe and then get home in one piece.
And they're stabilized. Yeah. And you can even take that a step farther. Your dad would say, this is a relationship issue for me. I don't want to go away for more than a week to 10 days. Like 10 days is my absolute max. Yeah. Like I was away for 2 weeks one time in St. John. And I'm like, I don't freaking want to be in St. John without my dogs for this long. So you can call that a relationship issue with me.
But and last time I went, I took my dog. So there you go. I'm telling you, I don't like leaving my dogs with a bunch of people that don't know my dog. Because he's more intelligent than most people I know.
Oh my God,
and he's going to have a problem dealing with them.
Scott really loves his dogs. Okay, next one. A preoccupation with your dog's needs.
For example, making sure they have toys, the fluffy pillows and beds. They go to a daycare. They have play dates with all the dogs every Tuesday and Wednesday. They walk down to this dog's house and have a play date there. It's a little bit nutty.
Yeah.
It's a little bit nutty. And the problem is, if you feel that way, it's just not a healthy, your dog doesn't need that much attention, first of all, and giving the dog that much attention is not emotionally healthy for the dog, in my opinion.
Yeah, doting on them that much and them knowing that you're at their beck and call all day. And this is a thing. Like, there are some stay-at-home moms, the kids are at school and stuff, and, like, the dog all day, like,
well, you become you're just their driver.
Yeah.
That's all you are. It's like you drive them to daycare, you take them to this one, and they don't give a crap about you. And you're doing everything. Why doesn't the dog like me? Because the dog doesn't get anything from you. The dog is getting all of its rewarding experiences from these external things that you keep driving around, giving them, and all this crap,
Yeah, and I do want to mention with that, because a lot of people say, well, if the dog doesn't go to daycare, or he doesn't go to the dog park, he's just not tired enough at the end of the day. And we are the first ones to say that a structured 10-minute walk or structured nose work session or structured treadmill session or anything else is way better than hours of running and play. And Scott wrote a great article on this. It was a blog post called You Can't Outrun Crazy. And it's true. Like, everybody's like, oh, exercise the dog, exercise the dog, exercise the dog. After a while, you have a crazy dog with great endurance. So be careful of exercising a dog that has a lot of energy and it seems to have an endless outlet. All right, do we cover preoccupation with the needs? We did.
That's just okay.
All right, food issues. So this is another need that you may have a preoccupation with, but it needed its own category. We thought its own line item.
Yeah, and you could be either overfeeding your dog, so your dog is like a friggin' little pig, just plump as you can be, or very picky eater, and you're always peppering the food with chicken and pieces of, a lot of human food to get the dog to eat. And that's a relationship issue. Dogs typically, a healthy dog will eat when food is offered, and they will eat when they're hungry. And when they're not hungry, they won't eat. So what happens is when dogs are overfed, a somewhat more emotionally healthy dog will just not eat. So then they start adding all of these additives, and then they'll eat it because, just like I say about me, if I'm not hungry for dinner, it doesn't mean I don't want a piece of cheesecake with cherries on it. I mean, not a problem.
I'm a very good cook.
I could have a piece of apple pie with ice cream, but not really big on dinner that night, So if they're not hungry, it's better to let them pass on a meal and not eat,
100%. And if that happens a couple days,
then people freak out.
But if it happens for a couple meals, then you might also know, this isn't normal behavior. Like, if our dogs didn't eat a meal, we'd be like, yo, big issue. Like, any of our dogs didn't eat any meal, within a minute, we would be concerned.
And we have a dog in right now, and this is not to throw the owners under the bus, but they were giving this dog, a beautiful German Shepherd, 8 cups of food a day. Dog was not a good eater.
Yeah.
And amazingly enough, the dog couldn't barely get 8 cups of food into him per day.
And the dog's body condition wasn't great. So we changed the kibble and the quantity and all that.
Now the dog eats every time food is offered and happy.
And the other reason that we thought this would be a separate item is it's not necessarily always your dog's need to eat. Like, sometimes we have kind of like food is love, like an Italian grandmother or this kind of thing. Like, sometimes we have this thought process of oh, but this is his favorite cookie. The dog could literally be napping on the couch and people go and put it under their nose and they just get happy seeing the dog, enjoy a cookie and waking up from that. So sometimes the dog is eating when it's not even asking to be fed just because of what it does for the owner. And this frequently happens with dogs with anxiety. And I'm not trying to say if your dog's fat, your dog's super anxious, but you will see dogs that seem to have absolutely no stopping point if eating. If you free fed them, they would probably just eat most of the day until they bloated or puked, like those dogs are normally a little bit more anxious than dogs that eat, scheduled regular meals.
Yeah, and I mean, if you're hand feeding the dog, if you're reduced to either, here's another thing, if you need to stand next to your dog's bowl to get the dog to eat, and if you leave the bowl, the dog doesn't eat, there's an issue there. It's a relationship issue. It's not healthy. I mean, of course you could never go away overnight or for a weekend because the dog would not eat the whole time, which would drive you crazy. You'd be upset thinking about it. But these are some things you should work through. Yeah.
And these are things that we see
and
a
I
lot,
saw that it was
frequently.
like it was a TikTok or something where the guy, they put the food down and the boyfriend stood right next to the bowl and the girlfriend stood about 10 feet behind and the dog wouldn't eat and the boyfriend would say, "Come on, eat." And then the dog would take a little bit, and then he would look over his shoulder at the girlfriend, and then the girlfriend would say, "Eat," and then he would eat a little bit more. And every night, that was the routine. Both of them browbeat this dog into eating. It was so crazy, And they thought it was funny because that's the only way the dog would eat.
But we see this time and time again. So little relationship thing there if you don't have a consistent feeding schedule with dogs. And I get that some dogs are hard to keep weight on, and some dogs have an insatiable appetite and everything else. But these really extreme cases, and it happening time and time and time again, be thoughtful of that. Okay, inability to get your dog's attention. I liked this one.
Yeah, this is, again, where you take the dog out on a leash. It's a pain in the ass in the house. It's demanding of your attention in the house, which is a different list.
That's a separate
but
one.
then you take the same dog outside. He's at the end of the leash pulling at everything and could care less about you. You're you're not even in the dog's world. All you're doing is holding this dog back.
Scott wrote the phrase, "Dog's focus is almost intentionally away from you," and I did like that. And this is a thing. This happens. I don't know if it's happened as much before the past decade, but over the last decade, it is increasingly more common to see a dog that is on a leash. And when I think of this, I think of a setter or a hunting dog normally. It can happen with any breed, but a dog that just looks like, "Oh my God, I don't know where to go. Shiny object syndrome." Everywhere, right? Just processing the world faster than it can actually input it. And those dogs are...
You're talking about me now?
You're getting better. Maine is helping you. But those dogs are really not super stable. And then even worse, what sometimes happens is Scott on an eval will take the leash and that dog is Johnny on the spot within 30 seconds to a minute. And this goes back to the podcast we talked about, the sit podcast, where dogs can't even hold a sit anymore. And that's a sign of anxiety. All these little tics are a thing. So if it's happening when you're holding the leash and then when you hand the leash to a professional or maybe even another member of the family and it doesn't happen as much, that is something that you could explore and maybe delve into a little deeper.
Yeah. I think so. That's why we're talking about it.
All right, you kind of killed the surprise factor on this one, but the next one was dog demands your attention when busy. And frequently, like Scott said, these are the same dogs that when they're out of the house, they're but here, north, west, south, like crazy. And then when you're in the house, they're either following you around.
If you're not paying attention to the dog, they're like, "Hey, bitch.
Yeah, let's go. Don't forget about me."
I'm hungry now that I never eat. Now I'm hungry.
You pick up the phone. You get on the phone. You could even fake a phone call, right? You could even fake giving your attention to something else. The dog starts barking, constantly. And the dog knows that now you're splitting your attention and maybe you'll, placate it by giving it something to eat or a chew or something. These are the things that when they start to all be combined, you need to take a step back and say, maybe something isn't going quite right here. And preparing meals is a good one. If you're taking care of the kids, if the dog is constantly going to you for attention during these times, or even just asking for attention on the couch, constantly, "Hey, I want to get pet. Hey, I want to get pet." Our dogs do that too, and then we'll say, "Okay, go lay down." Or throwing a toy on you. We'll say, "Okay, go play by yourself." That's all fine and good until we say it's not. And if you can't get out of that situation yourself, then our dogs are removed from the situation. All of our dogs know we can do love all day long until we say that's enough, and then we're done. We can play all day long until I don't want to, and then go play by yourself.
Yeah, and then a good example, and of course, it's not good that when I wake up in the morning, I tend to get on my phone, which that's a little pet peeve of the wife.
We're working through that one.
But my dog, Jimmy, if he sleeps at the foot of the bed, and I'll go get a cup of coffee, get in bed, and have some coffee and look at my phone. He will just lay there like he's asleep. As soon as I put the phone down and he knows I've checked, then he comes over and gets some love. He knows when I pick up the phone, he's not going to bother me.
It's literally Scott's favorite part of the day.
When I put the phone down, then he comes over and gives me some attention. It's funny.
But you want your dogs to kind of tune in with you about that. The counter to that would be, oh my God, Dad's awake. Like, I don't want him on his phone. I don't want him drinking coffee. Sarge used to drink your coffee with you. That was maybe a relationship issue.
Very endearing.
He liked coffee, my pie. All right, we got 3 more. Dog destroys your personal property.
You have dogs that are going in your laundry, pulling out your underwear, things like that, tearing apart your bedding, and
or eating those types of things. That could be a sign. That could be anxiety or a sign of a relationship issue. I will say, and let's tie these together, because dog pees on your bed or belongings. I mean, if they pee, they're not necessarily destroying it, but they're still like defacing property.
They're marking it.
Yeah.
And if the thing is, if they have the reason I say it's a relationship thing is there's other people's clothing there in the house also.
Yeah,
the dog isn't going and peeing on the kids' clothes necessarily. The dog's peeing on your clothes.
That's true. But I wanted to tie that into like the bedding issue, because this happens a lot of times, like sometimes with a couch or a bed or even a specific pillow. If this is happening and you only own one dog, it's likely a relationship issue. If this is happening and there's other dogs in the house or there's other energy also happening often, it could be an issue with the dog. And the reason I say that is, like, we have dogs that if there's like a weak female or a female going into heat, maybe they would mark once in a blue moon on something like that. So maybe I don't sit there and say, oh my God, I have to totally like rehash this whole relationship thing with my dog. What's going on? Sometimes if that's happening and there's a lot of other animals in the house or hormonal changes or something else, maybe that's why.
And I would say that all of these things could be one-offs that have nothing to do. But when the dog barks at you and you immediately think, oh, the dog must need to go out and pee, and you're running, putting the leash on, bringing the dog out, and the dog's just jumping on you and being a friggin' idiot, and you do that every single day.
Yeah. Or a dog that like gets up in the middle of the night and wants to play at 2 a.m. A lot of people like deal with that kind of thing. And that's like a real thing that happens. We had a dog like that. It was referenced in that article I talked about, You Can't Outrun Crazy. Like, that's a thing. It just becomes like there's not enough time in the day to keep the dog going, because now the dog has more endurance and everything else. All right, our last, but not our least.
And this is probably the biggest one that I run into. The dog acts aggressively toward you, but not other people. And that is definitely a relationship issue. Yeah. There's a lot of dogs that I go to people's homes because of aggression issues. This dog is biting the owner, and I can work with that dog, and it's like the dog is great. Yeah. I mean, there's no aggressive tendencies at all. I can do anything with the dog. I'm not being mean to the dog. I'm just giving the dog direction. We establish a relationship again, which is what the topic is about, and the dog doesn't even consider the aggressive behavior. And I'm not talking about getting into nail clipping, but even nail clipping to a certain extent it's all a relationship issue where the dog has learned I have to tolerate getting my nails clipped. I don't like it, but it's just part of life. Just like a kid has to learn how to brush his teeth. He may not like it. He's got to do it every day. She has to do it every day. So the aggression towards, and that, again, that's what this whole thing was about when I said, what's the hardest thing to fix? Because, we have a dog. I have a dog right now, a client, that the dog has very good obedience. The dog can be off leash. The dog can stay on a bed. The dog can do all this stuff. But they're having some relationship problems where the dog is showing aggression towards the people. And it sucks because the dog is good. And I just hate to see that dog have anything bad happen to that dog, and
we're going to make it happen for the dog. We're committed to that situation.
I know.
And this is happening.
It happens a lot.
This is happening a lot for us, more so, especially now that it's just Scott and I. And literally, like, we've been doing the Scott and Jess show for going on 4 years now. Like, it's funny. Like, I think of this, and like, I have not had an employee.
Which show is that?
That I have not had any girls or anything working with us to help. So like this spring, it will officially have been 4 years that like no one else has been involved besides Scott and I. And especially since we've gotten like to Maine and moved a little bit farther north, sometimes we see a lot of differences if we have a dog in, that the dog is different with me or with Scott. And that's like day one. That has nothing to do with who we are as people, but you can get a little more intel into like, oh, this is the dynamic of the family maybe, right? Or like Scott walks in the kitchen, dog frickin' loses its mind because maybe his relationship with the man at home is a little bit different. So we can even see little intricacies there if it's not even about aggression, but when the dogs are dealing with us differently, when we're like pretty steady at this point, like every dog we touch, we're conscientious of, but like we're not allowing a lot of our own shit to go to these other dogs because they need stability from us. Like that's why they come to us. So when it's a level playing field and then there's a huge difference in compliance or, you know, whatever, behavior, anything between Scott holding the leash or me, that is a good indicator. And we'll tell clients, we'll say straight up, like, I think it's a little more of like a mana thing if you want. And like, you need to work through that, So, and that's, they like that. They appreciate that. But we are seeing that more and more and more. So then maybe it just becomes a relationship thing with the woman versus a relationship thing with the man, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Latino. I was thinking that thing about the dogs and you and I. And quite often the dogs do like me more and they don't like you. And no, seriously, but here's the reason why.
I've had like a really hard morning. I've had terrible allergies.
It's not a negative thing. I take the dog and I go and actively do obedience training. So they're learning, they're working with me, they're outdoors, we're doing all kinds of stuff, and it's not a bad experience for the dog. They like to learn.
How is it a bad experience with me? Where are we going?
Because you're the one that enforces all the rules in the house.
Yeah,
you're the one that
they
tells
need to listen. I make sure they listen now.
Exactly. But that's what I mean.
Yeah.
The day-to-day mundane stuff you have to deal with, and they learn the biggest lessons from Jess.
But they come and they stay quiet and they eat with Jess.
And they have to eat, and Jess is the one taking the food away if they don't eat.
It's just not a big cookie party like it is with Scott.
With me, it's more of a cookie party, and it is. So then they're like, oh, I can't wait till Scott comes. We're going to do some obedience because Jess is a pain in the ass.
We're going to get to work. All right, guys, this is where we came from. This was a thing that came up this week. It is a topic that is fresh, and it's something that we are seeing more and more and more often. And again, if you identified with anything within this podcast, it doesn't have to make you be like, oh my God, I need to go journal for 6 hours.
No, it's not unfixable.
It's almost more fixable. And like Scott said to start, when you identify the problem, that is the first step. So identify the problem. And trust me, we get relationship stuff going on with our own dogs all the time. We'll say left and right, like, oh, you got to fix that over there with Gusto.
I think that our relationship is about as ideal as it could possibly be.
As far as the human relationships in the house, it's just perfect.
Our dogs just run for the hills when they see us getting into it. Oh, my God.
All right. We will see you guys next week. Take care. In the meantime, keep it quirky.
The views and opinions expressed by the hosts, guests, or callers of this program do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe, the United Podcast Network, its partners, or affiliates.